did you realize you wanted to be a musician? Was it a specific moment or was it a latent desire?
I was about 6 years old, I think, and I was in the back of my dad's Cadillac, and we were riding down the road on a sunny day in 50s America, and Frank Sinatra was singing Young at Heart, and my father was singing along. And I think later that day, my parents said, "What do you want to, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to be a singer." And I wasn't even sure what that was, but I knew that guy singing was a singer, and I liked the sound of his voice. And I think I was really impressed that my dad sung along. I thought, wow, anything my dad will get with, that must be a heavy program. So that was the moment, I think.
What are the first memories of music you have listening like yourself? I read somewhere you were into like Harry Partch. Just check that out.
Well, that came, the sophisticated stuff came later. I think for me, the first stuff, I was sort of torn between bel canto music like Sinatra, Tony Bennett. I was even listening to my dad's Lester Lannon records, which is society, big band stuff, Benny Goodman. And then on the other hand, like real gut bucket raunchy rock and roll, which most people would know through Elvis, but also was like Jerry Lee Lewis, Link Ray, Johnny and the Hurricanes. The first record I ever bought was 99-cent Johnny and the Hurricanes album, and that was like a typical what you called a greaser band from the Midwest, and that'd be 5 guys, and the guy in front would play a sax, and he'd play it like this, between his legs, and he'd play it like this, and he had a great big pompadour hairdo that would come cascading down right between his eyebrows, and then he'd be dressed in a real tight shiny suit, and then the guys behind him would have identical suits of a different color, and when they played their guitars, they'd all do little formations all at once, and that was a typical greaser band. And at the time, if you had like a good car, like a good hot rod, and you were in a greaser band, you could rule your area, right? And a lot of these bands, it wasn't as legitimized an ethic as it is now. It wasn't like the kind of rock that goes to college. This was like working class, I can play guitar, I could beat you up, and I could steal your girl kind of rock, and there was a lot of grease and form-fitting shaped clothing involved. So that was one whole kind of thing. And on the other hand, I remember being like 17 years old, I think I was, when the Sinatra album, September of My Years, came out. And wow, what a great record, and I'm listening to this guy basically singing about the entire history of his life. At least he does in one of the songs. It's a very good year, I think, and I'm only 17, and I thought about that. Wow, this music, it emotionally, it had a big pull on me because of the beauty of the melody and the beauty of the arrangements. But I thought, gee, I guess most of the kids aren't listening to this, but I didn't care. I liked it anyway. And then classical music is in there for anybody that really likes music, and you get a little in school. You might get Ravel, who I really liked, you might get a little Beethoven, and that shit's powerful, So for me, anyway, it started from there, and then what happened next was, you're listening to like normal things like the Shirelles, the Ronettes, the Crystals, all that great Spectre and Motown stuff in school, and you get these more from singles. It wasn't really album-oriented, but from a single record, you get a wave of emotion. You just feel, whoa. Or conversely, from something like more like a Duane Eddy record, you get more of this bad feeling, like you want to go out and rip something up, And those were kind of two poles of the whole teenage pop music experience. And then at some point along came the British, or the Beatles, and then the Stones, who basically took American music and stole it and sold it back to us with a little more wit and a little more remove and reserve, and were able to push it to a whole market of people that for whom, say, Elvis would have been a forbidden pleasure. But the Beatles you could put on the coffee table. And then once you could put them on the coffee table, then, you know, the Stones you could put on the coffee table to show you were funky, you know? But when, you know, as a kid, when I got those records, what was really cool, especially the first Stones record, was I'd look on the back of the record and I'd see, like, you know, Holly, you know, on one of their, who's Holly, you know? So I discovered Buddy Holly, and then, like, you know, you notice they're playing all these Chuck Berry songs. Well, let's actually listen to the real Chuck Berry. E. McDaniel, who's that? Well, that's Bo Diddley. M. Morganfield, and it was Muddy Waters. So I learned about all the real guys through them. And then when you hear the real American, mostly black or poor hillbilly models that this music is coming from, you go, whoa, this is a whole universe of poetry, you know, and danger. And like, especially with Chuck Berry, he's very essential for his ability to paint you a picture. He can paint you a succinct social picture that you can see in your mind and tell you a story and have it rock all in about 2.5 minutes. So like in his archetypal song, Johnny Be Good, you have, whoa, here's this guy. Where is he? He's sitting by a railroad track, you know? And what is the area like? Well, it's Louisiana, and there are evergreen trees. He tells you what sort of tree, you know, and then he tells you the whole story of this guy's life in like 2.5 minutes. That's pretty cool.
I was going to actually bring up to that, is I know you played with the Paul Butterfield blues drummer, and I know you played in the Chicago band for a little brief time. So obviously the blues, if you want to talk about, I read somewhere that your whole concept of phrasing or your idea about singing and simplicity, you know, has a direct link there.
I played in blues bands basically once I realized through the bands I'd liked when I was about 18, once I realized where they were getting the music and where all this stuff was coming from, I thought, well, let's learn what we could learn from the source. And really, when you do listen to good American blues or rockabilly or more roots music, it makes pop music it makes it sound cheap and kind of toy-like, and sounds like, okay, Junior, you know, nice try. And so I sort of hung out in that scene for a while and learned what I could, and finally figured out, well, you know, on the other hand, I'm never going to be John Lee Hooker. So I'll go back and try to do something with that, which is basically what a lot of my heroes were doing. Van Morrison, or the Who, or any of them, any of these bands from the 60s, the best of the 60s British people. Even in the lyrics they write, you'll find they're using American blues and R&B phrases and vocabulary and sending it back to you lyrically, and they're doing the same thing musically too. It's just old licks kind of messed around. In Bob Dylan, if you listen to Subterranean Homesick Blues, that's awful close to Chuck Berry. And even a lot of his more involved lyrics, the way he's throwing little bits of imagery together, it's real close, you know.
Speaking of Dylan, I know in your Wild America video you have the graphic with something about, you know, he's going to bring it back home all the summer 1965.
Yeah.
You want to talk about Dylan at all? Is he an influencer?
Well, yeah, it was a real major, and you know, when I heard there were 3 records, like what happened was I graduated high school in '65, and I said, right, now we're gonna live. So I dyed my hair platinum and grew it to this length and got arrested and got my first mug shots and wrecked my first car and got a good gig for my band and got fired for being a troublemaker and all that stuff. And I did all that to really 2 records, which was the Dylans' Bringing It All Back Home and the first Stones record. And those 2 records kind of gave me hope. I mean, besides being really intoxicating music that made you feel, whoa, so many ways, the Stones record more just felt like a tough little record, like meeting a tough little chick at a bar, and you know, okay, you know, she can take some punishment, you know. It was like that. It was like you knew you weren't going to knock this band down. You know, in those days, battles of the bands were a popular thing. It was always, well, who's got the toughest band? You know, and the toughness was a musical value too. You hear it in like Stax Volt stuff, like Green Onions. You know, it's real to play the minimal lick forcefully and with a lot of authority. And so the Stones had that, and the Dylan record was more just intoxicating on the, the vocal. It's almost like hearing a mullah, like the guys that sing the Muslim prayers. It's hypnotic, the vocal, and the music was coming from some sort of strange folk bluesy place to these little blueses that he'd make up that it would give you the impression anyway it had been made up in about 8 minutes and then recorded right then, and then the guy died laughing after. And so it had a lightness to it. But the things important about it was that neither of the guys singing the songs could sing in the conventional sense, and they couldn't go whoa baby baby or woo or trill or any of that shit. They had a voice just like.
Was there a particular artist that blew your mind and really turned you on or changed the course your music was taking as you started out?
Maybe, yeah. There was one thing that happened. One day I was at my manager's flat, and he was just a college dropout who used to be a hash dealer and wanted to get into some sort of line of work, so he thought rock and roll would be about right. And he started playing this record. It sounded like some guy just going on a saxophone, and it was John Coltrane. And I didn't know. It really sort of scared me at first, and it really annoyed me. And then I smoked the hash, right? And it really sounded different. It sounded really good, And so little by little, it took me some months to get next to that. And little by little, I started listening to this guy, and then I listened to him actually play like things like My Favorite Things, which is a song with a beautiful melody, la da 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 da, and he'd start with that, and then he'd just turn it inside out, and that freed. Up until then, I'd sort of had this idea I was going to try to do updated, motorized, stripped down versions of music that I'd sort of heard through being somewhere between Chuck Berry and even Muddy Waters sort of blues, and more up to the minute Who, Stones, Kinks, monolithic egomania rock that the British were pushing, with the exception of the Beatles, which was different. And then I heard this, and I thought, he was so unpredictable. He didn't know where this was going next, and it was like that, and then it made other things sound very tame. And I thought, wow, how could I do that? And I thought, well, I can't play an instrument like that, but maybe I could do it with my body when I sing. And that kind of was the little light that sort of started me in whatever direction I may have gone as a live performer, sort of, yeah.
Speaking of performance, was there any, I read somewhere about you saw Jim Morrison at the Theo's Fieldhouse and how he antagonized the audience was something that, intrigued you. Is there any performers in general you want to talk about?
Well, when I saw the Doors, that was the day in which I was ashamed not to go out immediately the next day and do your own gig. If this guy could do that, because it was a beautiful performance by an obviously extremely stoned human creature. It was very Hollywood look he had sort of Hedy Lamarr curls as she wore in Samson and Delilah, and very pale face, very big pupils, a leatherette ensemble with a big fluffy shirt, and he came out at a University of Michigan homecoming dance on a stage only about 18 inches high, and he refused to sing any of the songs in a normal voice. So, instead of singing like, "The clock says it's time to close now," he'd sing, "The clock says he died. And he sort of just wandered the stage like a drunk, right? And it pissed these, hey, you know, I'm the captain of the football team here, and we paid for this, and we're gonna get your ass. You know, there was a real heavy question of, can you antagonize us this much and get away with it? And the Doors weren't a very good live band at the time. They were a good recording band, but they hadn't gotten that together yet, and they were kind of punily and abjectly muddling along in the background. And after 15 minutes, 20 minutes, the thing got shut down. But I loved it. I loved it. I was totally, yeah, you know. And after that, I thought, hey, you know, if that'll pass, we could do it too. It was theater. It was theater, and then later they got very, very good. But I never saw another gig like that. Not quite like that.
Hold on. How's the sound? Who are those people talking?
Those are like human beings.
No, I just
members,
remember they, like,
they're
can they
members
just
of the
like
human
that?
race who do not live on television.
You know. Little cheat. Okay. Let's go. Yeah, do you want to mix down previous slate? Oh, we're still rolling? We're cool? Okay, never mind, sorry. I also want to talk about the region where you grew up as maybe an influence, the whole Detroit, Ann Arbor.
I had an orgasm at that Doors gig too. But it wasn't just the music. But anyway, continue. Yeah.
We're talking about possibly the Detroit. I read that your sort of distorted guitars and tribal beats were maybe something with big cars, the swish swish noise of Detroit, and also just the whole scene of MC5. If you want to talk about Detroit, if that's an influence.
I think the two classic themes that I ever noticed in rock and roll in general, as it started, was cars and girls, or you could say speed and sex, right? And I think later the place that cars had was kind of usurped by drugs, but cars originally was a thing, and everybody wrote about cars. The Beach Boys, Chuck Berry, a lot of people, and yeah, I used to be. I mean, like a lot of '60s youth, you know. Once I got to an age near majority, I just started taking everything I could possibly get my hands on, and it really made me fixate on automobiles, and I'd always liked sports cars anyway, and the big Detroit cars, but I'd never really listened to the engines, you know, before I took acid, and then whoa, you know, and of course, you know, when you take acid, for many people, like your vision becomes like you get little trail visions of everything. That's why people go, whoa, a Grateful Dead concert, so they dance, you know, and so I used to like to just go sit on the overpasses over the highways in Detroit and just sort of sit there and stare at the cars whooshing by and watch their trails and listen to the sounds of the motors, and I used to like the drag strips for that too, and that basically the whole idea of the music I was trying to make starting out came from that, and from the sound of the experience of going to the car plants, like when we were kids. Like, I guess you know, if you're a little Italian kid, they take you to see like the Pope and St. Peter's on your field trip. But when you're from Detroit, they took us to the River Rouge car plant, and we'd watch these big machines go boom, 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 and they say, kids, that's how America's made, you know. And I thought, wow, you know, pretty big and noisy, you know. So I was trying to make something I called industrial rock, but that was about 20 years before the term that later came in vogue. And yeah, cars.
Speaking of, okay, sure. Do you want to talk about Detroit at all? As far as the whole Ann Arbor scene, is there a music scene there that's an influence, like MC5, or is that not?
Yeah, sure. That's relevant. That's okay. Relevant. Yeah. I think personally, I feel very fortunate that to have been from the time and place I which was Detroit in the '60s, because there was a guy there, John Sinclair, kind of I think he was an ex-con of some sort, but basically a jazz-loving, insane nut who wanted to be a promoter, like most music promoters still to this day, with, you know, some sort of funny origins, you know. But he he organized something called the Jazz Workshop and something else called Trans Love Energies, which were basically excuses for his friends to party and smoke dope. And he he promoted the idea that you could in the area that you could really bring quality music to people and that they would respond, and that you could do all this stuff yourself, that you didn't have to listen and listen until you could imitate something that sounded like it was on the radio, like it was commercial, and hope to jump into the national network and move to New York and have a career or some bullshit like that. And that made us basically go, hey, fuck you, to the entire professional apparatus of the American music scene. And because of that, our music got strong. And there was the MC5 gave me my first gigs opening for them, and they were just a very powerful, automotive-oriented band with that at least there was a political agenda on the side, it was kind of amusing because Black Panthers were a popular group at the time. They decided they'd have the White Panthers, and they were handing out these little postcards in the streets in Michigan, in the Midwest in 1969, and it said, our platform, rock and roll, dope, and fucking in the streets. And I mean, you really can't do that, like police will really get uptight. I mean, maybe they would now even, I don't know. How are they about that? I don't know, maybe they do it themselves, but at that time it was a BFD, so, but what happened was, there were a lot of local, it was perfectly possible to be a Detroit band and to be the most popular band in Detroit among our circle of people and to have all the things you needed to live a great lifestyle. You had pure respect, you had parties, you would get together with your friends and rent a farmhouse, and maybe you'd all each pay $40 a month for the rent. And you had whatever you liked to get high on, and you'd all buy a used car together, and you could live really well. And that's what attracted later.
Okay. Moving ahead a bit, I wondered if you could talk to us at all about maybe David Bowie or the whole Warhol Factory scene, Velvet Underground, Nico, John Cale. You want to talk about Lou Reed, any of those characters? If they are an influence or not.
Sure. Something really key and central in my life that happened was when a guy from New York named Danny Fields, who was a publicist for Elektra Records and also a member, if there was such a thing, of the crowd that congregated in the back room at Max's Kansas City and revolved more or less around the art and activities of Andy Warhol, came to Detroit, and he saw our band play, and he actually saw me. He saw me after the guitarist had left the stage and the amps were just feeding back, and I was wandering around in a maternity dress, screaming in people's faces and spitting on them. And he walked up to me after this and he said, "You're a star." And I thought, oh, this is some pervert from New York. He was, I don't know what he was, but he must be the janitor at the record company or something. But he was a responsible American executive in the recording industry, and basically dragged me here over the next couple of years, and I started frequenting that place. I'd met Andy Warhol once briefly in the 60s when the Exploding Plastic Inevitable toured Detroit, and I thought, oh, this is a really colorful group of people. And I had never seen his art, but just in the way he dressed and in the colors of the people with him, Gerard Malonga with his whip, and Nico, and the walk and the talk of the thing, you could see the connection to rock and roll, which was basically a disconnection from, it was a further disconnection, a little further than most people had gone yet, from given a damn about the accepted societal values. You know, would never play on the Dean Martin show. Wouldn't even play on the Ed Sullivan show. And, you know, going, basically hanging out at that, in that bunch at that time was sort of like, it was, I don't know, it was a little bit gay, a little bit camp, a little bit witty, pretty drunk, sort of an experience. And it was theatrical, and at a time when there was not yet an organized rock scene in New York City. There was nowhere. There had been one club where you could really hang out that rocked, which had been called The Scene, that a guy named Steve Paul had, and that had been shut down. And there really was nothing. There was nowhere to go. If there were shows here, they would be more at concert venues. Everybody come, watch the music, and leave. And so that place kind of started attracting music people too, and who also were attracted to the lifestyle. And I think I learned a lot there, but I'm not sure what. And at one point, ran into David Bowie there, and also had run into Lou Reed there. And Lou Reed had been was a big influence and idol of mine as a musician, and the Velvet Underground record had been real key for me in the same way that for hearing John Coltrane the first time had. I heard it once at a party, and I thought, what is this annoying crap? And then I heard it again a few months later after I'd grown a bit, and I went, whoa, it's really great. And that was the Banana album with the Andy Warhol Banana cover. And so then at one point I found myself out of favor with Elektra Records for various reasons, and they were suggesting that I get somebody to write songs for me and pursue a career similar to David Cassidy. He was the role model brought up at the time. He was a good boy, sensible, he looks good, and he does what he's told. And I just didn't see it. I didn't see myself going that way, so I gravitated more to these strange people. And one night, Bowie and his manager Tony DeFries and a gang of them were in there from England, and they were looking for people to promote. And I thought, well, England, it sounds like a good escape, and they looked like twisted enough people to let me do some of what I wanted to do. So we hooked up.
So with your work with Bowie on a couple of your albums, do you guys work, I know you're a collaborative team, but do you cite him as an influence, or is it more like, yin-yang off each other?
I'd say David Bowie, who is an all-around quality gent that you might find active in any era in entertainment, or perhaps in another field, was a huge influence on me, especially in terms of information. And he opened me up really from having been more a Midwestern kid who was like, I only want to rock and roll and fuck everything else, dude, to, whoa, that theater is pretty good, or wow, so that's what painting can be like, and this and that and the other thing. You mean you use this fork, and et cetera, things, everything, I'd say, from everything that had to do with appreciation of life and survival in a larger and more worldly sense. And then musically, I was lucky to be working with him when I did, because he was making, I'd say between 1975 and 1980, nobody was making music like the music that had his name on it, that was, that he was orchestrating at that time. So that was some cool shit.
You brought up theater a little bit, and I know you do acting, and your whole stage persona is like unparalleled in my opinion. So, do you have theatrical influences as well? You want to talk about it all? Or any influences in that?
No, I mean, I can't really talk about theatrical influences. They're not nice.
Not-
I mean, basically, I think basically, as you know, at this point in history, as an American, there comes a time when one has to be in the movies. That's about it, you know. Or on TV, you know, some people crash their car into McDonald's to do it. You know, it's pretty much become the compelling issue of our time, hasn't it?
I had a few questions, we're getting fast, but I know we talked about Detroit. Do you want to talk at all about Berlin or New York? If either city has been a big influence, this place is an influence possibly?
Well, sure. I think for me, great cities, you know, usually, a great city usually is something that presents itself to me, probably because of the way I think, as a kind of a potential playground, somewhere between, something like a school. And there should be a part for your education and a part where you can just go out and play. And there should be those two elements. New York has offered that, as I'd mentioned, and especially through the scene that more or less revolved in the 60s around Andy Warhol and his people. And then later, there are a lot of capable people in any great city. And when you meet and work with capable people, even if it's something out of your genre, or if the project folds and is a fiasco, maybe you met one person who taught you something you didn't know before, and that's what's great about activity in general, life in general, and what cities offer us. You know, firsthand information and the chance to stand or fail, and then as far as the play aspect, a lot of that should come about through the spaces available to you in the city. New York's getting iffy for that right now because the rents have gone. For most people can't afford to live here. This neighborhood's changed a lot since I came. I'm probably part of the problem, but hey, what can you do? You know, but there should be large, cheap spaces where somebody can sort of knuckle down and create something, and there should be spaces where people can meet and create their own entertainments for little or no money. And I found that in Berlin in the late 70s. I found that more than anywhere because basically it was the biggest ghost town maybe in the history of the 20th centuries, 20th century, because nobody really wanted to live there because there was no future there. It was disconnected from everything, sitting in the middle of communist East Germany, but nobody wanted to let it go either. It was like a bone that a couple of dogs were gnarling after, and for that reason it was an interesting place.
And this is sort of a loaded question, but if you could... Oh, to roll out? Can we just reload them? Okay. I just have 2 questions left.
You want to do them outside or do them here? You want to do them here and then outside you're just going to shoot coverage. Coverage, yeah, sure.
It's for each person on the tape you saw, like who's everything up front.
Right.
This time I'm going to try.
Quiet, please.
Okay, this is sort of a loaded question we're asking everybody. If you could turn a fan on to any one album, what would it be? If you could sort of repeat the question and the answer somehow.
Gee, if there was one album I could turn a fan on to, since we're in the present time, it's today, it's 1998, I would say go out and get Too Bad Jim by R.L. Burnside, who is, to my mind, the greatest current American singer. Happens to be about 70-some years old, and it's available on Fat Possum Records out of Oxford, Mississippi. And he should have been recognized a long time ago.
The other one is sort of a broad stroke question, but the bigger picture, can you explain what the power of music is for you?
I'd say for me, maybe the first word that comes to mind when I think of music in my life is transportation. And it's gotten me away out of a lot of places I didn't want to be and into a lot of places I could never have dreamed of going.
Okay. I've got one question for online next. Is there a specific video that made an impression on you in some way, and if there was, would you tell us about it?
I don't think any video has. Videos all make an impression in there, I think, which is basically, wow, what a cheap and vulgar medium. It's fantastic. You know, everybody should make one. You know, but to say that there's a video that's made an impression, no.
Do you have a favorite at all, Brandon, like just entertainment?
Oh, I like them all for 5 minutes.
Okay. Cut. Cool. Step outside. You know, so, you know, one of the other John Spencer spots that's not on that reel I gave you, he went off about our, we put it
Oh,
on,
yeah?
it's great.
A little bit of room tone there at the end.
It's really hard to find, but you have to check it out. And he's like, that